I'd like to take a moment to introduce Laura Rudolph. Laura currently serves as the Director of Enrollment Communications at Transylvania University. In her current role, she oversees the university's marketing plan, ensuring that all strategies and elements of work cohesively to generate awareness and interest in Transylvania from prospective applicants at each stage of the funnel. She serves as a member of the Department of Senior Leadership Team and a liaison to the Marketing and Communications Office. She has spent 13 years in a variety of marketing and communications roles within higher ed, and I'm excited to welcome one of our partners, Laura Rudolph. Welcome, Laura. Hey, Laura.
Hello, Nappy. How are you?
Good to see you.
It's great to see you. Thank you for that very gracious introduction today. And I'm actually joining you from Transy today.
Oh, well, welcome. I do have to make a statement. I'll let you take over because many people know this. As a Center College grad alumni, our two schools are very competitive with one another. Center and Transy are two private liberal arts colleges in the state of Kentucky. So I'm humbled that Laura gets to be our speaker today as a peer. So kick it away, Laura.
Thank you, Nappy. I appreciate it. And thank you for letting me come back to Innovate today. This is actually my third Innovate conference this year. And I'm thrilled to bring you this presentation, which is Emailing Gen Z, Best Practices in this Challenging New Era. And I'm sure all of you who are in enrollment feel the word challenging very strongly right now. So we're going to walk through a little bit today. First, I do want to mention a little bit about myself, which you already know a little bit about my background. I've been a little over 12 years in higher education marketing. My background was originally in journalism, so I used to be in news editing and writing, which has come in very handy with content when it comes to email. I'm also an avid consumer of behavioral data, and I do that for our office here at Transy. So I make sure that all of our counseling team and our staff is really up to date on what is that data and that information that we need to know about our prospective students and their parents. I am also the reigning office trivia champion. I can only say that because we haven't had trivia since March, but I'm going to take it and use that as some of my influence today in my presentation. So I want to introduce you a little bit to Transylvania. You may not be familiar with us. We are not located in Romania. We are located in downtown Lexington, Kentucky. We are a small liberal arts college. In fact, we are the 16th oldest college in the country. We are the first built west of the Allegheny Mountains. And at the time, Kentucky was not a state, so you had to travel across the woods to get to our college. And hence the name, Transylvania means Latin for across the woods. As far as our academics go, we're about 1,000 students in enrollment. And our incoming student profile is fairly high. It's a 27 ACT, around a 3.6, 3.7 GPA. For those of you who are watching this and you want to know a little bit more too about our students, we're a very regional school. So we have a significant Kentucky population. We also have a significant student athlete population. We are a Division III institution, and for 1,000 students, we actually have 47% of them enrolled as a student athlete and are involved in one of 27 intercollegiate athletic teams, which seems like a lot. So our students are very involved in athletics. We have 46 majors, many pre-professional tracks. We, up to March, were Kentucky's only test optional school. That, of course, is likely going to be changing. We've been test optional for about 5 or 6 years here in Kentucky. This is year 3 with Engage. I'm just going to say now, I'm going to call it CBE at some point in time during my presentation today. And we are also a SLATE school. We are finishing our 3rd cycle with SLATE. And so you will hear me use some SLATE terms throughout this presentation today, but I'll make sure to kind of make that clear for those of you who are not SLATE users. So why Transy? Why us? When I was asked to present this a couple of months ago, I asked the same thing. What is it about Transy that is making it worthwhile to do a presentation about? And so Capture shared some numbers with us that we thought were really helpful. When you look at February 2020, this is when this data was kind of presented to us. Our application pool, as far as identified students for fall 2020, was double that of the Capture partner average. And then when you look at our admitted pool, and as far as February 2020, it was nearly double the Capture partner average. This was, of course, great news to us, but also very surprising. When you look at our data now, as of June 2020, I just pulled this yesterday, we've grown even more, and we're very excited to see this. Our fall 2020 identified students for admitted students is more than double the capture partner average, as is our deposited. We are almost at 100% of identified deposited students. So we're very excited about that. And that, of course, allows us to make a lot of great decisions as an office and as a counseling team throughout the process of the college search. So typically these outcomes are at the end of presentations, but I wanted to go ahead and show you what our outcomes look like so you can see why our process is kind of working for us. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to walk through what our communication process looks like in developing our email communication, and it starts with research and ends with assessment. This is typically an annual cycle for us, but just know that some of these things happen continuously throughout the full cycle. Research is ongoing. We're continually inundated with white papers and new data that we continue to use throughout the cycle. And assessment, for instance, is used throughout the cycle. We're constantly doing feedback on our visits and events and other things that we do on our campus. But this is our typical research to assessment communication flow process that we start each summer and we end each summer. So let's go ahead and launch into our first step, which is our research phase. One of the most important things about the research phase for us is knowing the audience. Who is your audience? What information are they looking for? What mediums do they want to receive it in? How frequently do they want to receive it? All of this matters. And so if you can identify your audience, that's kind of the first step. For us, one of the things that really bothered us many years ago is that we were starting the conversation off on the wrong foot. We kept asking, okay, what information do we want them to know? And we're just going to push it to them. But we realized very quickly that we shouldn't be asking, what do we want them to know? We should be asking, what do they want to know? And so we try on an annual basis to ask that question. What do they want to know? What do our audiences looking for? When do they want to receive it? And then how can we align our communication to best fit our student and our parent? Because you can push the information you want to them, but if they're not interested in hearing it right then they're not going to absorb it and they're not going to be interested in it. So if you lead with that kind of strategy of providing what they are interested in at the moment, we identify our audiences. These are an example of some of the audiences we use at Transylvania. For those of you who are Slate users, you'll know the term populations. And populations are simply an umbrella term of a group of people. One unique thing you might see here is that our prospects and our inquiries are actually lumped together. When I first started in enrollment over a decade ago, we treated prospects and inquiries very differently. Prospects for us are those who are name buys that we're purchasing, and then inquiries were those who had already raised their hand. And what we would originally do is we would maybe send 5 or 6 messages to those prospects, hope to kind of get them interested and to inquire with us. And if they didn't, then we just kind of let them go and we didn't worry about communicating with them the rest of the year. However, what we're seeing at Transy, and I'm sure a lot of you are seeing as well, is that we're seeing an increase in students who are stealth applicants. So the application is the first time that we're seeing their name and they're not going through that inquiry phase. They're skipping inquiry. And the reason why is because so much is available online at their disposal. They can go to Niche and Peterson's and CapEx and all these great partner websites. They can go to your student, your own website. They can do all the research that they want to do. They can go to Google. There's all these abilities for them to be able to do the research without having to reach out to you. And frankly, this generation of students are not going to be the type to pick up the phone and call you and ask you for questions either. So they're going to do a lot of the research virtually. Because of that, we thought, we're going to treat prospects and inquiries the same. We started doing this about 4 years ago, and we've seen a great increase in our stealth pool, but being able to identify some of those students earlier. That way, we're treating them the same. Now, we don't just all of a sudden bombard them with email. We do let them know that it's going to happen. So we may say, we're going to be sending you some stuff over the next few weeks that we hope that you're interested in. If not, we understand you can unsubscribe and we will not continue to send you communication. But it's really worked out for us to treat populations of prospects and inquiries exactly the same. Now, we do segment a little bit further in each of these populations. So we also are going to have legacies, high achieving students, disciples of Christ, That's what we are affiliated with here at Transy. Transfer students, application status. We will still send segmented messages to these under these larger populations of people. But the problem is if you do too many populations, you are going to start having emails that are going to be sent on different days and potentially on the same day. And the one thing you don't want to do is send 3 emails to a student in one day with maybe 3 calls to action and 3 different messages. So it's easier for us to make sure that we're not bombarding our students by having fewer large populations and segmenting within them. So the next phase is we know who they are, so now what do they want? We do a lot of data review. We do external data, and we also look at our own feedback cycles. So these are 2 things, hopefully, that you have in place at your institution. If you don't, I highly recommend that you start looking at your feedback cycles to make sure you're informing your own communication as you go throughout the year. I'm not going to read all of this Gen Z student data because I'm sure many of you are very familiar with this. And I will say that I have put an asterisk by our Gen Z student data for a very good reason, which you probably know why. This is pre-COVID-19 data. Now, we know that they're still going to potentially have these values and still act in these ways, but we know that it's possible that the coronavirus and the lockdown that we have been in is going to change some of their opinions and change some of these ways that they feel. But generally, if you look at a Gen Z student, they have a very global perspective. And in fact, this is more versatile now more than ever. They're very involved in social issues and social responsibility. And I think that's very evident in our society today. They have very diverse families and diverse structures. They very highly value the opinion of their parents. They also are very highly personalized. I call this kind of the Netflix effect because that's really one of the first that started. Whether it's Netflix or Amazon, they're able to get on there and rate information, and then it's able to be tailored directly to their needs. They expect colleges to be the exact same way. They're very future focused. They're entrepreneurial. And most importantly, they're very marketing savvy. So don't think that they're going to get your email and thinking that it's not marketing, because they will. And this is where authenticity is really important. Lastly, debt and employability. Now, this has always been a chief concern of them, but I can guarantee you that moving forward, it's going to be even more so. These students who have lived through something that none of us have really ever lived through before. And this is something they have learned from their Gen X parents, and I can continue to see them be concerned about in the future moving forward. So now let's talk about the Gen X parent. I personally love Gen X parents because it's a type of communication style that I really appreciate. They want transparency. They want honesty. They're a little cynical. They think everyone is kind of self-motivated, so they're going to be distrustful until you give them a reason not to be. They're always going to be looking for the fine print. And so being honest with them can really win them over. This is a conversation I have with our own campus visit team regularly, is that if a student, is curious, or a parent is curious about what's the worst thing about Transy, obviously don't be negative Nancy, but be honest with them. And honestly, even though it's a negative answer, it can actually win you points with that Gen X parent. Even if it is a 100% positive answer, being honest can actually seem like, oh, they were very honest. I now find them a little bit more trustworthy. They also really care about personal accountability. You'll see this in the emails that I will show you moving forward, but we really focus on making sure the emails are coming from people. And it's because they don't want to know that a process is going to keep your student safe. They want to know who is the point person, what is their phone number, how can I contact them. They don't want to know that there's an office of health in case your student gets sick. They're going to want to know who is the doctor, who is the APRN, when are they available, how can I contact them. They really care about personal accountability. And of course, they're very skeptical of grandiose claims. They're sensitive to prices and the value that they receive in return. And this is where Gen X parents have really influenced their Gen Z students, and they care a lot about affordability and value. So the big question really now is, how will or has COVID-19 changed these perspectives of the parents and the students? And I think this is going to be something we're going to continue to have to learn about. I know that many of you who do work in admissions may have started to receive some data already, but this is some that I've already received that I wanted to go ahead and pass along. We're seeing a lot of parents being concerned about students going away from home. They're potentially going to be pushing their children to enroll closer to home, to live at home and commute to college. They're likely going to still push their child to do virtual tours instead of going on campus, even if on-campus tours are available. Of course, 56% of junior parents are concerned that their family is able to pay for their college. So these are all going to be things that we're going to see moving forward. And I'm sure data is going to continue to be developed and sent to us in white papers and other formats over the course of the next several months. It'll be really important for you to continue to absorb this and read this as we go along, because it can really help notify you of changes that you might need to make in your communication plan as we move forward. This is from McGuire Associates. They did a lot about cities. So if those of you who are institutions in our top 20 markets, it's showing that domestic students are considering enrolling outside of those locations. They're not as interested. And parents are even more concerned about it, even in large Midwest markets like St. Louis and Chicago. A majority of parents, both students and parents, indicate that COVID-19 has not actually changed their rank order of colleges. However, it doesn't mean that they hasn't changed their thought of where they end up enrolling. So while you may not see a lot of changes in that initial process, that search process, those applications may still be coming in, it may not change their rank order of colleges, but it really may affect where they end up choosing when it comes to yield season. So all of these are really important to kind of keep in mind as you move forward with your communication plan. Now, I know that's a lot of negative information, but I thought this is a really great positive data point from EAB. They have said when they looked at their partner information, they're still reaching students' inboxes at high rates and avoiding spam filters. They're maintaining recent benchmarks. And in fact, in March 2020, in comparison to March 2019, their response rate are 17% higher than they were for the equivalent communication. So even though students, I think, are certainly having this, what I'm calling virtual fatigue, they've been working with NTI, they've been on the computer doing webinars and virtual sessions. It doesn't mean that they're less likely to open their email. And in fact, it looks like they're opening it at a little bit of a higher rate because they know that this is the information medium in which they're going to be receiving information if they can't receive it in person. So if you use all of that external data, you also need to look at your own internal data. So I'm going to show you a little bit of what we do here at Transy. One of the surveys that we do every year is a matriculated and non-matriculated student survey. So at the end of the recruitment cycle, we'll send those students a survey and just ask them, what was your process like? What are some things that were important to you in the beginning? And what was it important to you at the end? And so you'll see here in our survey, we asked, what were you most interested in learning about during your college search? 1, academic majors. 2, financial aid and scholarships. 3, post-grad jobs and graduate school success. Now, we always like to look at this external data. Is the external data really validating our own? And in fact, when we looked at RNL's national survey, it was exactly the same order. So that made us feel really confident that our data was definitely aligning with the national data. We also asked level of preference for different types of communication. This is really important. To us, this was a great news. Our email from admissions was just as preferred and highly preferred by non-matriculated and matriculated students. So this means email, yes, is still working, which is good news for us. We also asked email from faculty. Now, this was surprising. They really prefer and highly prefer email from faculty. Of course, you can always ask myself how we have done this and facilitated this in the past. And we actually have some great faculty on campus. We give them a template because, if you tell a faculty member to write about their research or their academic field, they could just write paragraphs and paragraphs of information. So what we do is we provide them a template with an introduction and a closing, and we ask them to fill in about 5 to 10 sentences in the middle selling their program. And that allows us to facilitate the emails through Slate, but still come from the faculty, and then they're prepared to answer any questions that they receive from students when they are sent. Now, this one should not surprise any of you, and it did not surprise us. Phone calls from admissions was highly not preferred and not at all preferred by matriculated and our non-matriculated students. Now, what does this mean? This does not mean that we should eliminate phone calling of students. What it means is that maybe we need to reconsider when and why we are calling these students. Maybe there's other mediums that are better fit for the communication that we're trying to do. Maybe it's better fit for a text or an email. Maybe it's not a phone call. Maybe the phone calls we reserve only for the parents. So these are the conversations that a great survey like this outcome made us think about. We really hadn't considered that phone calls were really significantly going out of style for this group of students. So now we need to kind of reassess how we phone call our families. Now, this was something really important to me last year, and I think it'll probably be pretty important to you. Frequency. How frequent would you like to receive emails as a senior? And we had a very differing group of answers here for matriculated and non-matriculated students. Some of them wanted it once a week. Some wanted every 2 weeks. Of course, there were others who said, just once a month. So the question is how can we meet all of these students' expectations? Do we do 2 weeks because it kind of encompasses everyone? Do we do a mix of the three and kind of vary our communication? And at Transylvania, we decided we're going to do a little bit of both. So we actually compromised all of these into a communication flow. Another thing we do internally for a feedback cycle is A/B testing. I highly recommend this. There's certainly an option to do it in Slate. We have found that subject lines that include the student's name have higher open rates. If they are from an individual, as I mentioned earlier, parents really care about that personal accountability. So if we put the student's counselor, a staff member, a faculty name, all of those had higher open rates for us than just being from the Transylvania University admissions office. We also use emojis and unique subject lines, and those would increase open rates. I do say under the right circumstances. Obviously, if we use emojis every single time, it no longer stands out. So we would use it during really important information when it was application deadlines or things that were maybe a pertinent of time. And so whenever we use those, it would certainly increase our open rates for our students. The next phase is our planning phase. So we've done all the research. Now it's time to start planning and let this data kind of lead the way. So our timeline starts typically, I want to say in May, after May 1, but of course this year has changed that. So we are actually in this process right now. We develop a full year communication plan for email, print, text, and anything in conjunction with our marketing and communications office. So I am the liaison with our marketing communications office. I will take all that data to them. We will then start our timeline and develop our full communication for the full year. Now, even though I'm a journalism background, I still need a sign-off rule for content and for design before it reaches the point of scheduling. It's always good to have more than one set of eyes. I can sometimes miss conjunctions and things like that. And so it's great to make sure that we are 100% accurate, that we have 2 other people in our office that are reading and approving these emails before they are scheduled. We are also a small school on a small budget. So while we would love to have ample opportunity to merge all of our print with our email, we knew it would be really hard to do that in a days out scenario. So what we do is we group senior populations and we launch them at different times. So if a student has inquired or been a prospect up to, say, August 15th, then they're going to be in senior group A. If someone then is a prospect or an inquiry between August 16th and, say, September 1st, they would begin senior group B. That way we group our students and we launch those communication plans at the same time. And so we know exactly what day they're receiving emails, and we can exactly send those print within those email timelines. So then the week that they're getting an email about outcomes, they're actually going to also receive a print communication in their inbox, their mailbox, that is also about outcomes. So we're able to then correlate all of our print and our text and our communication all together by grouping our seniors in different groups. Organization. Now, we'll say this ranges from office to office. For our counseling team, we are a Google school, so it's great to use Google Excel. Each population has a tab in our Google Excel sheet. It contains timing, subject lines, links to the emails, who it's being segmented to, what is the call to action, who is the email sender. I constantly keep this on a tab on my desktop. It very rarely ever goes away because I'm updating this on a daily basis. We use an email status that is color-coded as well. And it's distributed not only to the admissions office and our counseling team, but also to our marketing communications office. What this does is it allows them to see the messages that we're sending and when we're sending them, and they can coincide their social media messages with the messages that we're sending out into the email inboxes as well. That way, it really creates an integrated marketing campaign overall. So here's an example. Of course, this is not ours, but this is a senior campaign example of what it might look like in a Google Excel sheet for you. We have the date, how it's scheduled in our Slate system, what the content is, our call to action, who the signature line is on that email, any segmentation that might occur within that email, and then what the status is. This gives our counseling team a very quick glance. They know what emails are active, what's in progress, and what is coming up. And the best thing about this is that they can then schedule their territory management emails within these. They're not duplicating days. We're not going to have multiple messages from multiple people on a single day. Our next step is developing the content. So we're going to plan. We have done all of our research, so now it is time to launch this content. And the question I'm asked most often is, what content do you use for your senior prospects and inquiries? So we're going to use exactly what we just used, what we just developed, our external data, our survey answers. We're also going to look at what differentiates us as an institution, and what are our brand pillars. And then lastly, what do we know yields? Campus visits, being on campus, those obviously yield, but of course that might change this coming year. So what do we know is potentially going to yield in this coming year? Now, what we're going to do when we're looking ahead for this coming year, and I'm sure you are too, is we're going to double down on some key elements based on some of this new data. So we're going to continue those best practices of our email, which we'll talk about here shortly: frequency, readability, authenticity. We're going to focus significantly more on value and affordability. Concerns of finances are paramount now. Price sensitivity is increasing. So we really need to be proactive and transparent. I'm sure that all of you are getting the same questions that we are right now from our admitted and our deposited parents, which is, what is fall going to look like? What's going to happen this fall? Is my student going to be able to come on campus? They want pure transparency and information. So the more that you can provide and be proactive, the better it's going to be. So we're going to continue to move forward with that with our fall 2021 class. So when you're developing your content, we really try to keep it simple. We really watch our subject line length. 80% of our emails are opened on mobile devices. So it only shows about 25 to 30 characters of your subject line. So we try to keep them within that so we're not running off of their mobile page. We use conversational language. It does not have to be as formal as your website or your print. And we're very concise. I call this kind of snackable content. If you have too much to put in one email, it ends up being 4 or 5 paragraphs. That just means that it gives you an additional touch point. So write a second email. And bullet points are your friend. One thing that I bring back from my journalism days is called inverted pyramid style. Some of you may or may not be familiar with this. So essentially, back in the day, when they had the printing press, they only had a certain amount of space to lay out all their characters. So they might think that they're going to have space for a 500 character story, but they only end up with 300. If you write an inverted pyramid style, it actually solves all these problems. What do? Is you put the most important content at the top, your second most important content, and then your least important content. So if you have to cut from the bottom, then you can, and it doesn't affect your story. So for us, we do this with our email as well. We know that students are going to look at the beginning, they're going to hit a short scroll, they're going to scroll to the bottom. So if we can catch them with that first or second line, even if they scroll through the third part, then it's okay because it's not as the important content. So you can see in this email, it was about MLK Day. We were open a couple years ago on MLK Day. We hit them with the most important information is that we're open. The second is how you can register. And third, if you want to come downtown and you want to explore and you want to be part of the Freedom March and the commemorative program, then that's available to you as well. But you know what? If they don't get to that part, that's okay because we have already told them the most important information up front. When it comes to subject lines, I wanted to give you guys some examples. These are some that we use throughout the year. Direct ones are great right now. I can tell you in COVID-19 time, we're using a lot of direct email subject lines. You're missing your application items. Here's information about our opening for fall 2020, those kinds of things. But it's also great to use other other types of subject lines. Guiding is one that we use a lot. I call those my BuzzFeed subject lines. 5 ways test prep can help you with your GPA. And occasionally questioning can really come in handy, especially towards the end of the cycle. If it's coming from a counselor, Laura, do you plan to apply? And it seems like it's a question coming directly from your counselor. In addition to keeping it simple, these are some other things that are great. Ask questions, act like a real human being, and use your CRM data to your advantage. All of our CRMs, Slate or otherwise, has a ton of data available to you. So variable data doesn't cost you any money with email, so use it to your advantage. Be yourself. Don't try to be something that you're not. We always tell students when they're writing their essays, if you're funny, be funny. If you're not funny, don't try. So don't try to be something that you don't feel represents your brand as an institution. Focus on one call to action. Don't ask them to do too much. I have seen emails that might have 3, 4 call to actions. There's 10 links in it. If you ask them to do much, they're not going to do anything at all. So really focus on one call to action for each of your emails. And of course, I told you we have a 2-step process, but check your grammar because small things can make a big impression. And I can tell you spelling out Transylvania is not exactly the easiest thing, and those letters can certainly get transposed. So make sure that your grammar and all of that is completely up to date and is accurate before you send your emails. Lastly, be fun. Email can be less formal than your website and print. Be funny when it's warranted. We use GIFs when it's relevant, and I'll show you how we do that. Design. We actually update our design pretty regularly at Transy. We will be doing that this summer as we have a new website launching in July. And so we want to make sure that our brand is being represented the same, whether they're looking at print or they're looking at email or they're looking at our website. For us, we care about being clean and interesting. So we designed number 1 for mobile. I told you a majority of our students are opening everything on their devices. So we have a mobile first approach. This is how I design all of them. I very rarely look at that desktop version. We try to give them variety in their emails. So not every email looks the same. It will look a little different. One might highlight a video. One might be a question and answer with an alum. It might be a pull quote from a current student. Make sure that you have alt text. So if a student is using a text to voice on their phone, it will still use the information that you have in your photographs and other things to tell them what is present visually that they may not be able to see themselves. Also, not emails need visuals. So while this is an example of one of our emails, some of the most opened emails from our counselors have no templated design at all. It actually looks like they're just sending it straight from their Gmail account, even though it might be a mass email that I'm sending on behalf of all of the counselors. One thing that we have tried several years is moving our buttons around. Our call to action buttons actually change according to the status of the student. So if they are in the prospect phase, it might be located in one place. If it is later in the admit or deposit, we might move that button up. So it's great to do this A/B testing to help you decide where are the best locations for our buttons. Also, avoid important content in your images. Kentucky is a really interesting state because we do have vast differences in our socioeconomics from the eastern side to the western side of the state. We know that in the eastern part of Kentucky that we don't have as many students that are on unlimited data plans. We know that a lot of them are more on pay-as-you-go, and so they may not download those images immediately on their phones. So if they're not downloading the images, if there's anything important in them, those students aren't going to receive it. So we want to always make sure that we don't put any important information in that image that if a student does not see it, that they're not missing out on anything. And lastly, of course, the whole important part of this is that you are identifying your students. So don't forget to put your engage links in your different links that you're putting in your buttons. This is going to make sure that they're sending them to your website, they're being identified, and then you're able to use that information to better give your counseling team the information that they need to help make decisions. Lastly, assessment is your friend. It's great to learn, to use it, and to move on. And we assess all year round, but this is one point in time in which we use a lot of assessment to make decisions for the coming year. So you may need to ask yourself, what emails are performing poorly or well? What have the lowest open rates, the lowest click-through rates? What have the highest? And maybe why is it that that email has performed so well? What is it? Is it the subject line? Is it the content? the timing, the design, this is a great opportunity then to use your A/B testing. You can have a couple of theories, roll it out there, and see really what works for your populations of students. Now, when it comes to me every year, I have a 70-20-10 strategy for my emails. 70% is what I know works. Luckily, we've been doing this process for about 4 years at Transy, and so we know our majority of our emails are working well. But we always like to try something new. 10% of what my new emails are every year is just taking a chance and trying something different that we've never tried before. And obviously, a great opportunity is if you work in enrollment marketing, is to look at other colleges, see what they're sending, sign up as prospective students. I had a friend that used to sign up their dog as a prospective student to get an idea of what is everyone else doing. And the great thing about the Slate community and also the Capture community is that we're all very into sharing information with one another. So try something new and exciting every year. If it's just 10% of your email and it doesn't work, then it doesn't affect overall your communication flow, but at least it could potentially be a great success and something that you're doing that another college is not doing. So for us, this is from February 2020, so it is not completely updated, but you can look at our population open rates. So this is based on data from the past 2 years. We have fairly high open rates for our sophomores, our domestic seniors, goes up incredibly for our international students in both the senior and the admit phases. Our senior parents have their own comp flow and they're opening it at 30%. And our deposit is starred because it hadn't launched and been going very long at the point when this data was taken. But now it is actually up significantly from 41%. Another thing that we look at is time of day and day of the week. So we found that our average best times for email are after 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, and that the average best days for our emails are Wednesdays and Thursdays, and the third is Friday. The ones we always avoid are weekends and Mondays. They tend to have really full inboxes, and so they're not as likely to see our email. But these are great things that you can look at for your own institution, dig into that Slate data, dig into your CRM data, and see what days and weekdays are really performing well for you. So now you can kind of see the full circle of what our communication flow process looks like, from research to planning to content to design and all the way down to assessment. This is a continual cycle. We never stop on this. And throughout the year, we even will assess it, midway through. Maybe it's December and an email we thought was going to be that 10% was going to be awesome, just is not performing well. We may call an audible mid-year and we'll assess it then and make some changes. So don't think that you have to keep to this process in this order, but it's certainly something that you can do to continually inform you and your recruitment team of communication and getting those students identified. So hopefully this information has been really helpful for you today. Like I said, this has been a 4-year process of developing this at Transylvania, and it's worked very well for us. Please feel free to connect with me online. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Recruiter Rudy, or you can email me directly at lrudolph@transy.edu. And Lynn and the Capture team, thank you so much for having me today, and let me know if there's any questions.
Thanks so much, Laura. That was fantastic. I feel like every time I hear you speak, I learn something new, even after 20 years of doing enrollment management, both behind the desk and with Capture. It never surprises me when I don't know. So thank you for bringing all of those wonderful insights together. I'm looking through and scrolling through questions that are being posed in different areas. Len?
I do have a question. Laura, one of the things you said in the beginning was talking about just the different populations and just being mindful about how much segmentation you do. It's something that we wrestle with all the time, the level of segmentation. Do you find, now having done this for 4 years, is there one population that perhaps later in the funnel you always make sure it is highly segmented? And if so, why is that? Because we get asked on many occasions in the top of funnel to have very grand segmentations and complex workflows and if-thens, and be curious to see based upon your analysis, late stage, do you then adjust, and if so, where?
That's a great question. So one of the things that we have noticed at the point of admission and forward, particularly the admitted student phase, that's really when finances become critical. And so we really start narrowing down our students based on maybe their EFC, their expected family contribution from their FAFSA. So maybe there is a family who really needs a little bit more money. Maybe they really need to hear from someone else about that value message. So one thing I can always recommend is, parents love to hear from other parents, students love to hear from other students. And so one thing that we're going to be implementing this coming year is getting some current parents involved in that process. So if we can segment a little bit more to the families who have been here, they have maybe a high EFC, they understand value, but they're not willing to necessarily pay for it. Then maybe we can connect them with someone who is of a similar EFC when they came to Transy, and they can talk about why they decided to choose it and why they found that value and affordability really mattered when it came to the outcomes that they would get as a Transy student. So we do a lot of financial kind of segmentation when it comes to that point of admission, because we're finding that is the most critical point. Earlier on, it's, legacies, right? It's trying to get people involved. Application status early is really important, but by the time of admission, that really changes when their priorities shift. So I would actually recommend any schools who are thinking about that if they are putting out these surveys like we are, they can add those questions in that say, at the point of admission, what were the most important things for you to make your decision? And that's actually a question that we ask. Outcomes are also really big for us. So we will often segment too on academic major, but we'll focus on the outcome portion at the yield stage. So that is another way that we segment kind of post-admit.
Sure. Laura, one of the things that I love that you all do is not just developing communications that you think is important to the institution to get to the students and their families, but moreover to understand the needs of the students at different times. As you have done this survey through the years, have there been any major changes in the needs of the students and how they want to be communicated with? That's question one. And question two is, what has been the most surprising thing that you've learned?
I would say, when I started this a little over a decade ago, we were really dealing more with baby boomers and millennials. They acted very differently than Gen X and Gen Z. And just the things that they were interested in. Particularly parents, I think, had the greatest shift. In fact, I worked at Transy for a couple of years. I left. I returned to Transy. I call it my sabbatical from Transy. When I came back, that shift had kind of happened during that time. And so when I came back, I had originally had this parent communication flow. I actually ditched the whole thing. It was written very much for the boomer audience. And frankly, they really enjoyed the more high-end things about Transy, the fluff. Like, they were okay with marketing fluff. Baby boomers really were. We talked a lot about our Tempur-Pedic mattresses in our dorm rooms, the rock walls that are in, the gymnasiums and things. You could talk about those things with the baby boomers, and they really loved it. But the Gen X parent, they are not swayed by the flashy things. They just want honesty, transparency, get to the point. Tell me exactly what I need to know. And it's actually been really fun to rewrite the communication for those parents, because I appreciate that. I appreciate that they just want us to get straight to the point. And I think the more honest with them you are, as I mentioned, even if it's a little negative, they're going to trust you more. So really, I've seen more of a shift in the parent than I have in the student. Although the student being more socially interested and responsible in social issues have become more, and diversity has become more important to those groups of people, that has also changed kind of our focus in showing them how they can be entrepreneurial on our campus and they can make an impact on our campus. So that's kind of the language and the messages that have changed a little bit for the student.
That's fantastic. Has there been anything just wild and weird that you learned in the feedback from students of what they want to know?
I don't think there was anything that was significant. I think we weren't too surprised by the phone calls. Sure. Certainly. I was a little surprised. I remember when texting really first became a thing in admissions, is that we were so scared to send text messages to students because we're invading their personal space. That has just changed completely. if they're okay with receiving it, they would much rather text you than to email you or call you. So that has been a bit of a surprise because I feel like that change happened very quickly. So we're relying much more now on texting than we had ever in the past, when we were really afraid that we were kind of bombarding their personal space.
Yeah. Len?
Yeah, Laura, it seems like with a number of the initiatives you do, it's well thought out. You map it back to metrics. Can you share with us one experiment? You said 10% of the time it's kind of an experiment that performed so well, you were like, oh my goodness. And can you share with us the experiment where you thought it was going to go really well and it was just did not resonate? We're like this. And then why? Why do you think one outperformed? And what was some of so we can, share those lessons learned?
Great question. So one of the things that we tried one year that I was more than thrilled with the outcome was a Spotify playlist. So we had not really ever thought about integrating other virtual experiences into the email communication flow. And so we are Transylvania, which means Halloween is huge on our campus. So we actually have a Halloween visit week. We have, for those of you who want to look this up, we have a tomb in our administration building that does have 2 bodies in it. So we do a tour of the tomb during Halloween. We have what's called Pumpkin Mania here in Lexington. It's a really big week for us. And so we thought, why not send prospective students a great crafted Halloween playlist through Spotify, encouraging them to come to campus. And we actually, additionally, in addition to that, we did a print application reminder that was also kind of themed for Halloween. And it took off. So we actually started doing more of these Spotify playlists for different reasons. So we have one for spring break, graduation, and we actually it's one of the few things we receive emails back on that people actually said, like, thank you for this playlist. And it's just, that's an unusual thing to get responses like that from a big, general mass email. Mm-hmm. So that's one that has been really successful for us. As far as one that hasn't performed super well, I hate to say that one doesn't really come to mind, but I think there's some times where we think, oh, this segmented one is going to do great, and it just flops. So for instance, for us, one that has continually flopped is when we focus on our Disciples of Christ population. And I think while it's part of the student experience, that they aren't going to choose a school because it's a Disciples of Christ school when it comes to Transy. They care a lot about that as far as they're part of their personal experience, but they really care about the outcomes and what they're paying for. So some of those segmentation just hasn't worked the way that we really anticipated them working.
Sure. One of the greatest challenges that I've heard from our partners, and I think this is an obvious statement, that over the last several months with COVID and the state of affairs and all of the things that are changing right now on our campuses or virtual campuses, right? Talk to us a little bit about some of the changes that you and your team have had to make in lieu of the pandemic and being responsive to your students and families.
We have made a lot of changes. I do also manage our campus visit experience as part of my position. So that includes our campus visit team, our ambassador team, our tour guides. For any of you who are in campus visit, it has really upended what we do. And at Transylvania, being a small school, we rely a lot on yield by getting their feet in the ground here on our campus. In fact, I have just completed 4 focus groups over the past month or 2, and a majority of them have said, I was considering this other school until I came to campus. And so, of course, for me hearing that, it's exciting, but it's also concerning because now if we don't have that outlet for them, how do we convince them if they can't have their boots on the ground here on our campus? So we have really had to switch over to a completely virtual environment. Now, Transy is not a virtual school. We did not have online classes. We never have had online classes. So it was a major shift for our university to go online. It wasn't something that we have done previously. And so we were not just behind when it came to online courses, but also being able to do it for a campus visit perspective. Now, we lucked out. We have a great relationship with Student Bridge. We had just launched our Student Bridge interactive video tour in February. Now, we just barely got it in time. So that really made a big difference for us. We were able to at least have videos. What we also did is we quickly brought some of our student ambassadors to campus, and we did a video walkthrough of campus, and we are able to do that. We're also in the midst of doing a self-guided tour app, also through Student Bridge. So we know that students, one of the data points actually said 58% of junior parents are considering not doing in-person visits even when they are become available. They're still going to push their student to virtual. And so we know that students, families might want to come to campus, but they may not want to come as an official visit. So we're going to encourage them to come in the evenings and on the weekends and have this GPS guided tour that allows them to hear the audio of the tour guide, see the videos, see the pictures, even though they may not be able to get into some of the facilities. They'll still be able to access our bookstore, which will be public, give them coupon to be able to go to that location just like they would on a campus visit. And of course, we know it's not the campus visit, right? It's not what we want it to be, but whatever we can do to get their feet on the ground is going to be most important to us. And communicating that through email is incredibly important. That's where we have used a lot of our direct subject lines in our emails lately, because we just want to get to the point, tell the student exactly this is what they can expect. And we're trying to be as communicative as possible, but trying also not to overdo it. I mentioned virtual fatigue. It is real. We're already seeing that with our online webinars and events we've been doing for students. We have about a 50% show rate because it's just really easy to no-show a virtual webinar. So we're trying to be cognizant that they're on their laptops and their phones a lot. But at the same time, we want to make sure they're getting the information they're getting. We've had great feedback so far in our surveys. So we're going to continue to certainly push email, and luckily they're still reading it. So that makes us very fortunate for the future that even though we're not able to get them here, we're still going to be able to connect with them through email.
That's awesome. Thank you. Lynn, do you have any last questions?
I just have one last question. I think this would be great for the audience, as we do have a few hundred people probably in your position. We keep talking about like the output, the communications. Can you talk about for your staff, what's been the biggest change that you'd say, hey, for all you leaders out there, I want you to think about this when working with your staff as you're implementing these new, communication schemas or these new assessments. If there's anything you can share. Absolutely. I know I just put you on the spot because that wasn't really the tenor of the presentation, but I mean, you were able to adapt, and probably because you were able to communicate with your team, and any insight would be helpful.
No, it's a great question. And I think every office is a little bit different when you're trying to implement something that is such a significant part. I mean, if you look at our overall communication plan for all of our segments, you're looking at over 250 emails over the course of a year. That's a lot of email. It's a lot of email going here and there. It's a lot for the counselors to keep up with. But the most important thing is keeping an open line of communication. There is never a point in time in which our counseling team does not know what's being sent and when. And if there's a gap in time, I even try to be proactive and sending them an email and say, here's our upcoming communication. Just be aware this is what's being sent. What's also really important is that transition between the point of admission to deposit, when all of a sudden a bunch of other campus offices are also getting involved into the communication. And that overlap is really important. We're very lucky that we have a great relationship with our student life team, and they're able to notify us and put on our communication flow when other offices are sending communication as well. So it's not just like an office joint project. It kind of falls across the campus at different times of the year. So it's much bigger than that. I think also the most important thing is getting your counselors involved and really delineating what is territory management, what should be put on the major communication flow, what medium is best for this message. Because sometimes you might think an email is the best, but maybe a text message is totally sufficient. Or the same thing with a phone call. Maybe instead of phone calling, we're going to send them a schedule and say, set up a virtual time to meet with your counselor about your financial aid package instead of sending them a text message. So it's also kind of having that communication overall with your counseling team to help delineate what messages should go when who they should go to, what the medium is the best for them, and what might be considered more the marketing side and what might be considered more territory management. So they kind of know what their expectations are too as a territory manager for their own counselors.
Fantastic. Laura, again, thank you so much. As I've been reading through the comments that are coming through, there are lots of props to you, valuable content that I think many will take away to their own campuses. So thank you again for joining us today. We truly appreciate it.
Nabby, Heather, thank you so much. It's great to join you guys today.